Good morning. We are at the conclusion of Ayin Beis, namely page 1477, where we know the Rebbe Rashab did not finish the Hemshech. He left quite a few ideas still unclosed, basically, not answered, questions not answered, ideas not continued. But thank God we have the source material, meaning the mimer upon which the end of Ayin Beis is based on, and that is the Mittler Rebbe's mimer, Mika Hashem Elokeinu, which we are learning now. Mimer in Memory AdHamtz Bereishis, and we're on page 395 on the top, which in turn, the Mittler Rebbe's mimer is based on the Alter Rebbe's mimer in Torah, which we had learned with its explanation. And I continuously, as we're doing this, as I laid out a few months ago when we started this exercise, comparing it at occasionally different times to both its source in Torah in the Alter Rebbe's mimer, as well as its parallel text in Ayin Beis. But now we're already in the area that Ayin Beis stopped at, which was, namely, the Ayin Beis stops at understanding the Yichud of Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem, or Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the unification of the two levels of Yichud, of unity, which is part of the process of how the divine soul contemplates and impacts the animal soul to love God with both sides of the heart, which is the real focus here, ultimately, to turn Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, that the soul of a human being is a ner, a candle, which consists of a wick, the divine soul manifesting in the animal soul, which is the oil, and turning it into fuel for the divine love, fiery love of Ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, with both sides of the heart, both right side and left side, the animal soul, the divine soul and animal soul. And now we're learning, which the Rebbe Rashab also began but never finished, was the second pasuk, Ner Mitzvah V'Tere'er, the additional tools that a soul has. Obviously, a soul is the one that does a mitzvah, and the soul is the one that says Shema and also contemplates on it, and it's the soul that impacts the animal soul, but it's fully armed with an arsenal, a spiritual arsenal, namely Ner Mitzvah and Tere'er. So we're learning Ner Mitzvah. What is the role of the mitzvah? And the mitzvah generally mitzvah comes from Kodesh Elyon, from the highest levels of Kedusha, from Kedusha Sa'atzmus, in the words of the Mittler Rebbe, which is higher than all the levels of Kedusha in Seder Shtalshlus. Now, Kedusha means a holy state, but Kedusha also means removed, exalted, beyond, transcendent. But in that itself, there can be transcendent levels that are like Chochmah, or levels in the Shtalshlus that are higher than and removed from lower levels. But then there's the ultimate Kodesh Elyon, which is Asher Kedeshanu, b'mitzvei Sov. You've sanctified us, Kedeshanu, with your mitzvahs, the mitzvahs that Hashem himself does, mitzvahs Hashem, Havaya, that is what a mitzvah is. It draws down Kodesh Elyon, which is higher, in a revealed level, much higher than the Kodesh of the Neshama, which comes in its Sherish Rishon, as he said, meaning once it comes into existence, it comes from Chochmah. Chochmah is in the Shtalshlus. It's a very high level Chochmah, not to be dismissed. But a mitzvah adds that element of bringing even a higher Kedusha into the Neshama. That's why even Moshe Rabbeinu and Avraham Avinu also did mitzvahs, as we learned. And this comes to explain why before we daven and before we say Shema, we put on Talis and Tefillin. So what we learned, last thing we learned was this. On page 394, he went to Talis and Tefillin, which is back to the theme in Torah. I explained Talis and Tefillin is a mitzvah, of course. Mitzvahs in general create a lavush for the neshama, a garment, which means an additional support. That's the role of a garment that draws from the Makif. That's what a lavush is from Kodesh Elyon. But name specifically the mitzvah of Talis and Tefillin, which both are a level of Makif. The Talis wraps the person around the person thoroughly, and the Tefillin Shalosh is above the head. And he explains that this gives the power to the neshama to be mechaven, to focus on. So though the neshama has that, the vada yesh b'keich neshama ba'adam lachavim b'krishma b'yichudi Allah b'kavan of rusa deliba. The lama hutzach lahagdim b'tchil mitzvahs talis and tefillin dafka. And neshama has that power. That's why it's a divine soul. A divine soul does not come unarmed. Nevertheless, because the person has to bring that kedusha from the highest levels of the kedusha sa'atzmus into his being, meaning all the way into the animal soul. So that's where mitzvahs come into play, because they have that power to add that element. So the neshama has that power, but like I mentioned, the example of a military person. A military person without weapons is gonna be strong to some extent, but obviously the proper weapons will lead it to the fullest sense of the word. Basically, it adds to the whole gilui of the hamshacha that dafka mitzvahs do, because the neshama at the end of the day does come down and manifest and relates to the body. If you remember, we learned that the neshama is affected by the experiences of the body, the pain and joy of the body. So though the neshama is rooted in these higher levels, but as it comes down, it is subject to concealment. And the best proof is, look, a neshama in a body is concealed. Can the neshama fight the concealment? Yes, but the mitzvahs give it that power, because the mitzvah is a tool outside of the neshama that retains the kedusha ha'atzmus, the kodesh ha'elyon that he's been talking about. So when a neshama then it has the mitzvah, and especially talis and tefillin, like he says, and he wraps himself around it, he comes with all that power, like he says, after he explains the whole point of bringing from primus and atzmus of Ein Sof all the way into the person. So b'krishma zebaba emtsois hasaga elokus shebenishma sa'adam. So how in Krishma do we achieve this? Through the hasaga, comprehending the divine. And each person on their level, through the usa deliba, which allows you, the desire of the heart, which allows you to reach a place where less machshavet tfisa beklal, thought itself cannot grasp. And this is grasped by every neshama. So as much as the neshama has the power, the primary strength that comes from this, Hashem gives to his nation, to his people, particular strength. Since mitzvahs are a revealed state of Makif Elyon, so that in turn empowers the neshama, especially mitzvahs Talis, the mitzvahs tzitzis, sheshkula connected kol mitzvahs. So then Talis has the element it surrounds and wraps him around with Makif, and it's shkula connected kol mitzvahs tzitzis corresponds with, and essentially is the same quality and the value of all the mitzvahs. And the Talis is b'chinas Makif mamish. The lamed beis chutin, the 32 knots, corresponds to the 32 channels of Chochmah, Nesivus Chochmah, of the Makif Shalamayla, Eita Salma, as God wraps himself with like a shirt, or Levusher Kitlak Chiver. His garments are white like snow. All these higher levels. Prisa de Malka Shmei de Le'ela. This is drawn into a person when he puts on Talis. So it's like when you're appointing a king, Sum Tasim Alecha Melech, but Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shemayim. So this idea, the Shema is about Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shemayim. So the Talis essentially prepares you and primes you and gives you the strength to enter into that type of state. As he says clearly, that by Shema, V'hoyim Shema is through Hasaga Apidas, Apisaga Satam. Ach kedei sheyuchel lechaven daiti lamitis hayichud de'ilah, or hayichud elyon, ubekavona teva rusa deliba, in order to properly focus and concentrate, tzarich sheyam shel kabbalah soul, first on a level of makif that's higher than asaga and tam. So to use again the example of a soldier, when a soldier puts on his uniform and all that's there with him, obviously he's far more powerful because he has all these tools. But also the very uniform, in the sense like the Talis is a uniform, is a divine uniform in this case. So a person comes completely enabled and empowered with Talis and Tefillin. The Makif Talis and Al Gabi Reishe, and also Tefillin shall Al Gabi Hamoichin Shebereish, where the Tefillin have also the parshas of Shema V'hoyim Shemeya. So in addition to the Shema that we're going to say, and understand with our minds that tefillin above our heads also has those parshas, so it's an additional strength. And it's all written b'klav gashmi, in physical parchment, in writing. Ubeblita al gaba hareish. So I was looking for a word the other day. Blita is protrusion. That was the word I was looking for, to protrude above his head. We use the word extend. We use the word to bulge. Protrusion. Protrude is the right word. Beblita al gaba hareish dafka. Al yedei zeh dafka nimshach min hahelem de makif. Zeh. That draws from the helm of the makif, of the highest levels of this makif. So it's like before the student, so to speak, enters into trying to internalize it, first comes a whole preparation, and that's the Talis and Tefillin of the mitzvahs that draw down everything he just outlined here. And it gives him the power. It helps ma'amis. Ma'amis means confirm or affirm or to help resonate the truth of Yichudi law of Krishma. To the point that it should bring him to a deep love, a love of God, with both sides of the heart, to the point that he's ready to act on it, which is Mesiras Nefesh, Nisoyim B'Pel Mamish. The emphasis of this is that it doesn't remain theoretical. It's not just a contemplation. That the Talis and Tefillin and the mitzvah is helping him actually bring it into action until B'chol Ma'idcha, which is higher than the Kelim Ma'idcha, Chol Ma'idcha, which is higher than the Kelim of Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. That's where we stopped on top of page 395. So that's what the mitzvah does, and specifically Talis and Tefillin. Now it's interesting when you go to Torah the Alter Rebbe, when he speaks about this, he says all this, but it's so brief, you don't have all these details. Like in the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe is directly addressing what a neshama is and what the mitzvah does that the neshama doesn't have on its own. The Alter Rebbe just says that Talis and Tefillin are the words the Alter Rebbe is Makif, that helps elevate the animal soul during davening. Because before you elevate something, you first need hamshacha, strength from above. It's like the strength that you get empowered from above, that then helps you elevate the animal soul during davening. That's the brief what he says in Torah Ed on page 38c, as well as later on 39d, where he speaks about the Talis and Tefillin. Yeah, again, there the focus is that before you come down to do the work, you need strength first coming from above downward, which is the power of the Makif. That's in brief what he says there. But the Mittler Rebbe obviously elaborates on this. That sums up what we've been learning. And as I said again, the Rebbe Rashab never got to this point. Ayin Beis ends before we talk about how the contemplation of Shema affects the animal soul. Doesn't even get to Ner Mitzvah V'Tere'er. But I'm saying he doesn't even get to how it affects the animal soul, let alone the addition of Ner Mitzvah and Tere'er, which is what we're learning now. That's why we're learning this. Because what we're learning here is, without doubt, I mean, I like to say most likely, but the truth is, based on, we see the Rebbe Rashab following the flow of the Mittler Rebbe, that there's no question that that's what he would have come to, maybe with a lot more explanation, and I'm sure there would have been points that we may not be picking up completely, but at least we're learning how the Mittler Rebbe continues the discussion, and this will continue for a while. What Ner Mitzvah adds, and then we have to still learn what Torah adds, and how that also is a wick, a oil, and a flame, and then of course coming to the rest of what he's going to discuss all the way to Bia L'Sheves, the difference between Mitzvah and Torah, and I will then tie it all together and bring it back to Ayin Beis, which in Ayin Beis there's enough material that we can join the two, so to speak, pretty seamlessly, because the Rebbe Rashab did begin all these ideas. It's not like he didn't talk about it at all. He just didn't finish it, but he began it all the way back in page 1350, and covering all the different points I made before we started all this. After we finished Ayin Beis, I went through a whole things that the untied knots, so to speak, that the Rebbe Rashab did not finish, and we're now picking it all up, and then we'll bring it all together in one glorious, hopefully one glorious, seamless picture, and bring it back to the central themes of Ayin Beis, and perhaps even be able to speculate how the Rebbe Rashab would have finished Ayin Beis as he connects all this back to Vidaita Hayim and back to the themes all the way back to the beginning of Ayin Beis. So plenty excitement still to go here and drama, but we are right now is particularly in this piece of Talis and Tefillin mitzvahs as they add to the Avedis. So I just want to say this, and maybe I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything. It's not finished yet, so the topics are still still continuing here. But basically, my understanding as we read it all, if I sum it up, the strengths that we get, the powers and the tools that we have to affect the animal soul. Remember the operative question. The animal soul is self-interest oriented. It's all about self. In the words of the Rebbe Rashab, it's about the yesh. So how could you suddenly get a yesh of an animal soul that's focused on self-interest, as we all quite know in our own lives, to become v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha and love God, like the Nefesh Elikiz does? The Alter Rebbe asked that question in his words. The Mittler Rebbe asked that question in different ways in his words. But that was the big operative question. And the answer is ultimately through heavy avodah. That's the hard avodah. In Tanya, he calls it avodah Yigir Rabba. It's the avodah of contemplation, of focus and concentration. And it's very aligned with Tanya. Tanya is all about focusing the concentration of moich and moich shal ta'alev and the izbannus during Shema. But remember, we learned that the whole of davening comes to be mevarer, to refine the animal soul. And indeed, the Mittler Rebbe spelled it out, so did the Rebbe Rashab, starting with Psukkah de Zimra, which weeds, which begins to tame the animal soul. When we talk about, he spoke about Psukkah de Zimra, its effect on the animal soul, then leads to Birchas HaMa'eris, the two brachas before Shema, then Birchas Yetzer, Birchas Yetzer, and Birchas Avos Elam, where he talks about the Malachim, that the inspiration of the Malachim, which is the root of the animal soul, again, taming and helping prime the animal soul. Then the Ikar Aved is in Shema, and Evohim Shemaya, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And now he's adding that in addition, now we have the power of the mitzvahs. And specifically the mitzvahs that we put on before we start davening. Talis and Tefillin. So you list it all. You have Talis and Tefillin. You have all the davening, Psukkah de Zimra, the brachas before Shema, and all this comes together to all help attack, so to speak, the animal soul, and not just attack it, but ultimately transform it through many stages, taming it, directing it, guiding it, educating it, harnessing it, and ultimately transforming it to be also a contributor to loving God, and not only a contributor, but what we learned, that the fuel of the animal soul actually adds a lot more than the wick does. Because the animal soul is rooted in Toyu, but once you harness its real power, instead of it being directed towards self-interest, the animal soul is now fueling the divine love, as we discussed. So we have many, many tools here that are all coming together if you think about it. Now, the Rebbe Rashab, as I said, talked about it in Ayin Beis, briefly on page 1350, 1351, 1352, then later in 1466, and on, but he never came back to tie it all together. The Mittler Rebbe is tying it all together, which is what I'm right now doing in this summary. So all of this is essentially tools, and clearly it's not enough, one of them, because we're dealing with quite a challenge. And I don't think anyone has to be explained what the challenge is. Just look at your animal soul. Tell me how well you're doing. So you can realize the more tools we have, the more the arsenal, the more our repertoire is armed, the better it will be, and the more power we'll have to achieve what we need to achieve. Now, he doesn't really refer to Tanya, even though if you learn Tanya, you see similar ideas, especially in chapter 12. And then when he goes on chapter 15, 16, 17, I just began chapter 18. I'm teaching Tanya every week. So there's a lot of parallels there. I'll talk about that later, but just to point out, if you have looked in Tanya, you'll see the parallels, of course, of how the divine soul in turn affects the animal soul. And there he talks about the different levels of how deep we can awaken the love within, we can give birth to the love and then awaken the natural love, which he alludes to here in different places, but it's not a different track completely. They do complement each other. But here, of course, the focus is a lot more on the davening, specifically Shema, and specifically here now the Talis and Tefillin, the mitzvahs that we do before we put it on, before we daven and before we say Shema. So we're on top of 395. This is somewhat of a summary. If anybody wants to ask anything, please, now's a good time. But we'll continue.
Why is the neshama has to diminish herself before she's coming down in the body, because the body could not tolerate it? Why could the body tolerate the mitzvahs without diminishing themselves?
Okay, I'm sure you could figure it out. Remember, the mitzvahs are coming down in stages. The neshama is living with the neshama lives with the animal soul all the time. So we learned before, just like the same question you could ask, why did God need a tzimtzum to create existence? Because once you want existence to be, if you want an animal soul to do its function, to be an independent consciousness, and to come into tachtenim, there's no way around that with seichel at least. I'm not talking about kol yachol. You have to have a tzimtzum. So that's why we learned at length, if you remember, how the nefesh halikis dresses up and is misamtzim atzmei. The neshama comes down. That's why we say neshama shenesata b'tahirihi ata vorosa ata yitzarta ata nefachta bi ata meshamra b'kirbi, to the point that the neshama could even be trapped by the body and the animal soul, like we learned it could be held hostage. We learned clearly it's in golus, the golus ashchina, the golus on neshama. Okay, but that doesn't mean the neshama doesn't have power. It just means the neshama is subject to these concealments. Now, in the process of growth, the neshama itself grows. As we learn mutfa, murgish, muskel, as we grow from a child into an adult, the mind of the person develops. And as the mind develops, we're more mature, we have more control over ourselves. And that's why by bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, we become mechuyev b'mitzvahs and so on. Mitzvahs are outside of this whole process. Mitzvahs are tools that we introduce into our lives. Little children, we introduce the mitzvahs through chinuch. They start saying Shema, Maida'ani, Netilis Yadayim, different things, we're training them. As a person grows, mitzvahs are introduced, more and more mitzvahs are introduced to the child. And as we grow into becoming mechuyev b'mitzvahs, a mitzvah is already a tool coming from outside. The mitzvahs never were subject to any tzimtzumim because they always remained ratzon elya. The question now is what effect they're going to have on you. And the same thing with Torah, which we'll learn about later. That when you do a mitzvah and you learn Torah, that helps awaken the fire in the neshama. That's what a mitzvah does, because it's ratzon elya. So the mitzvahs also go through ishtalshlus. You cannot say not, because a mitzvah is also mislabish in dvarim gashmi. Tzemer gashmi for tzitzis. Klav gashmi, parchment for tefillin. So it also comes down, but it still retains, it always remains when we say, Asher kedushaну b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu. So here's a klutz kasha. What do you mean? My neshama shenesata b'tahirihi. What do you mean? Asher kedushanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu. What do I need? Kedushas hamitzvahs. My soul is pure and holy. We know that. A soul is a pure soul. It's a holy soul. It's a chelik elokam emal mamish. And you could even argue that in its root, it's even higher than mitzvahs. Higher than Torah, we know, we learn for sure. Higher than mitzvahs needs to be discussed. So what's Asher kedushanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu? Because the neshama right now is living in this world together with the body, and you don't know who's in control. The neshama is subject to all the issues. When the neshama does a mitzvah, it's like mayim kadim al nefesh hayefa. The neshama is now going back, and it's like a fish in water, like Rabbi Akiva said about learning Torah. The neshama is now engaging in what is most natural to it. When it's busy with the body is eating a meal. So it's filling your hunger. When the neshama does a mitzvah and you're eating the meal l'shem shamayim, or you make a bracha, or asher kedushanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu, or shahakol niyeh b'dvarim, whatever the bracha may be, what the mitzvah is doing is bringing alive and awakening and refreshing the soul with its natural source. And that's what a mitzvah does. So very physically, it's like exactly like I said before with weapons for a soldier. However, the difference is weapons don't necessarily have kedushas ha'atzmos. A weapon is just gives a soldier more firepower to be able to fight the war. I'm using it only as a muscle. A mitzvah is a divine agent, a divine power that Hashem gave us. Imagine the world would be only neshamas without Torah and mitzvahs. So before Matan Torah, you have something like that. You don't have the power of mitzvah ve'esa. You have the power of the oves. They did mitzvahs even though they weren't commanded to do mitzvahs, but it doesn't have, we know, elyenim le'yardu lamata, didn't have the power to transform this world. A mitzvah gives the neshama the power to do something that physically will transform the animal soul, the body and the physical world around it. So the mitzvahs also have an element of fitting in, but remember, the mitzvahs are not also pure bleak wool. The mitzvahs are mislabish. Each mitzvah, Ramach mitzvah sesa, correspond to Ramach evorim. 248 mitzvahs, positive mitzvahs correspond to 248 limbs. So every mitzvah has its particular function. So it's not overwhelming oyer that completely annihilates the human being, including the animal soul, but it's definitely additional energy. Let's go back to a soldier. If you give a soldier 1,000 pounds of weapons to carry, he's not going to be able to do anything with it. So it has to be weapons, addition to what he has on his own, but it's going to be commensurate to what he's able to do. Talis, Tefillin. So it's not completely pure. It's not the mitzvahs as they are pure in their Ein Sof L'mayla. It's mitzvahs, but they are carrying Ratzon Elyon in Dvarim Gashmi. And Torah is going to give even more power, as we're going to learn, because Torah is not even like a Ner. Torah is Oyer. Oyer Hamshachim L'mayla. We'll learn about that more. But bottom line, it's all coming down with the erech, the person, and it's all in stages. And stages like we learned, the person grows. The Shema that you said yesterday, and with Talis and Tefillin, well, not yesterday, Shabbos, we didn't put on Talis, we didn't put on Tefillin, but the Shema that you say in Talis and Tefillin a day earlier should be on a higher level today. You're constantly growing in this process. It's not a one-time thing.
That means that the feelings is the neshama. The effect on the nefesh habahamis is the neshama. But the neshama needs the mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are not connected to the feelings of the nefesh halakis.
A mitzvah without a Makif HaMitzvah is just Tefillin and Talis sitting on a table. They don't accomplish anything. They just have. It's like weapons without a soldier.
Rabbi, you said you were going to pick up the discussion about the women. What's the women don't have the mitzvah?
At the end of the class, because it's not so relevant to our discussion right here.
All right.
I'll do it a little later. It's not. I don't want to distract from what we're learning here. I am assuming you all probably can figure out the answer, right?
Yeah. Well, do women have different souls?
Well, if a woman is different than a man, well, of course they have different souls. They're not different by accident.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
They don't need the mitzvahs. They don't need the mitzvahs as much as the.
No, I know that. I just want to know how the women.
It's even deeper than that. If I'll give you one Maimer Chazal and it'll answer everything. Okay. It says Isha commanda mi'ila damya, which means when it comes to circumcision, the biggest mitzvah of all, bris milah, that Avraham Avinu received, and it says women are as if they're circumcised already. So, and there are mitzvahs that, for example, a Kohen does that a Levi or Yisrael does not do.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of diversity is not a contradiction to anything we're learning here.
No,
the question is, how is a woman mamshech the Makif?
Exactly.
So we can talk about that, but
all right, later on.
Nobody is deprived of connecting to the highest levels of God. It's just a matter of how.
Okay, thank you.
You're asking me the how, not the. We'll talk about it at the end of the class. I'll dedicate a few minutes to that.
I have a small, relative to all this, I have a fairly small technical question, which is a good segue to continuing to learn, because it's right where we stopped learning. And I think it had to do with putting on the Talis and putting on Tefillin and saying Shema, and then that whole process. It says that even no Talis nafshecha v'chomer decha l'mayla mina klei the nefesh ruach neshama. So it takes the soul higher than those first three levels, which could either be up to the level of Chaya or Yechida. So which is it? Where does it take your soul? I mean, you connect with the Eibishter at the level of Chaya, Yechida, both? Does it depend on your davening or your level of development? Like what specifically does that mean? Very
What are you
literally.
talking about? You're asking about B'chol Ma'idecha now?
Yeah, where it takes the where to what
What are
place.
you referring to? B'chol Ma'idecha, that level?
No, Lamaila mean the last four words of where we're
So it's
holding.
B'chol Ma'idecha. It's B'chol Ma'idecha. Right. So I would refer you in Ayin Beis, there's maybe 20 pages just on this topic. So we learned earlier in volume 3 a whole thing about B'chol Ma'idecha, what that means, in contrast to B'chol Avavcha, B'chol Nafshecha. So it's already been discussed pretty much at length in Ayin Beis. And there's a lot of different details to it. I don't want to go into it right now. Just suffice it to say that we say, V'ahavtas Hashem l'kecha b'chol avavcha, with both sides of your heart, is the heart. Nafshecha, your whole nefesh, all the 10 faculties, which is nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Chai yechida is higher. He doesn't mention chai yechida, so I don't want to talk about chai yechida. He just says higher than the kalim of nefesh, ruach, and neshama, which usually means higher than tam v'das, higher than the conscious faculties. Because nefesh is behavioral, nihi, or asiya. Ruach is emotional, chagas, or yitzira. Neshama is bria, or chabad, moichin. And the higher than those kalim is the superconscious in keser, chai yechida, or rotzen and tainug. But in Ayin Beis, I spoke about it at length, where I can refer you to if you want to dafka know where it is. It's
yeah. Well, I do, but also 932. Is this where he talked about Archi de Gilgalta? Is this? I know that's where the mitzvahs are pulling the neshama, but I just want to try and connect if those two concepts are connected.
Well, he's saying that mitzvahs come from that place, and here Talis and Tefillin are giving the power to come to higher levels, but he's not necessarily making a direct connection with those two. Bottom line is, mitzvahs are drawing down from the highest levels of the Makif Elyon, Kodesh Elyon, and it's empowering the Shema all the way to B'chol Nafshecha, all the way B'chol Vav Nafshecha, and now B'chol Meidecha. Can you connect it? Maybe. I wouldn't say
the pages you were going to refer
but it's to? It's not that he's necessarily emphasizing that connection, but it's not.
I'm just curious.
Let's put it this way: it's not out of the question that you can connect it.
No, I read a mimer, the Shabbos on Parshas Truma. They talked about the 3 crowns above Atzilus, which you know, which I'm gonna. Listen, go ahead. Moichin Stima and Gilgalta and Radla, and I thought this was like somewhere between Moichin Stima and Gilgalta.
You probably could imagine what I'm going to say, which is
I'm processing too much.
That if you learned another 10 Maimorim, you could probably find connections there too. And if I started bringing all the knowledge of Chassidus that associates with these ideas, we would just sit here for hours just on that.
For hours.
So can things be connected? I try to focus what it says here. Can it be connected? Perhaps, perhaps not. Sometimes there are differences. Just be careful when you start bringing different Maimorim in, they're not always going to be consistent, and it can just create more confusion as well. So the main goal, I would say, is not making connections. It's understanding what he says here. If there's something not clear, then sometimes you have to look elsewhere to try to get clarity. But if you want to start making connections, everything's connected with everything.
Right. I was just more specifically interested in what he means that it's above.
Okay, but you learned that mimer. We didn't, so you can.
No, I mean this language here. I was just referring to that because thinking about the Archin de Gilgalta, the strands, the extensions of the skull is what,
Are there any other questions? Anyway. Are there any other questions? I heard some voices earlier. Everything is clear. Okay. Okay, so let's continue learning. So the focus here is how the power of Talis and Tefillin before davening, before Shema, empowers the Shema itself. And obviously you need both. And they all together, they all give the power of a total onslaught in a positive way on the animal soul. Yeah. We're going to learn, and we did learn earlier in Teira'er, v'yemine tichapkeni. When you're hugged and embraced, and that's the idea of a talis. is the Makif of Elikus is embracing and hugging us. Just the very nurturing power of such a hug gives you tremendous strength. So if you want to really like visualize it emotionally, when a person is davening and they have the Talis hugging them, wrapped in the Talis, and the tefillin on their head, tefillin on their arm. So you're talking about being completely surrounded with Elikus. You know, when most of us maybe take it for granted because we do it just mechanically. But if you think about it, you're really surrounded with all Elikus inside, around you. And that in turn is giving power that when you say Shema and you focus and concentrate properly, you daven like you're supposed to daven. Unfortunately, like I pointed out many times, we're not necessarily trained to daven this way. I went to yeshiva my whole life. They didn't teach us how to daven. They teach us how to read Hebrew. So we could read the words, called lip service. When you start learning Chassidus and you understand all this in this context, you're talking about a real emotional experience here. You're talking about a full dimensional experience that affects us in all levels. All our senses and all our faculties are all being impacted. So really, if you think about it, that's what's going on. You're being surrounded by a tremendous amount of powerful energy, divine energy, which in turn empowers the neshama that's davening and saying these tefillah, Shema, like you'll see, it helps us be machaven. You know, he says the words, it's ma'amis, the yichudei love Krishma. That's an unbelievable concept, that the very fact that you feel surrounded by Elikus, of course, is going to make you feel the truth of it a lot deeper than if you just do it without any such experience. It's like when people go to a Chassidische Farbrengen, or they were Farbrengen with the Rebbe, it wasn't just the words that were said or the songs that were sung, it was the environment, it was the whole state of being, which is really what davening is about, is creating space. That it's you and God and nothing else. And you're not no distractions and no outside turbulence, purely yourself completely surrounded by godliness, which is what the essence of davening is, which is why it says in Gemara that before a person starts davening, they have to create that space. You know, that before you start davening, you have to first have that focus and that chana, v'shiflus, and bittul. But again, davening is a lost art in some ways. But at least we're learning about it. We're learning what's necessary and required to really properly daven. So then it's not a surprise when you read in the Sichos and the stories that the Rabbeim tell about people who would daven for hours, 5, 6 hours. It doesn't take 5, 6 hours to read the words. 5, 6 hours, however, for the experience, like the story with the Magid of Mizrich that I heard personally from the Rebbe many times, just to drive the point home. So he was once davening in the morning Shachris, and as usual, he was davening Bereishis. He was in his Talis and Tefillin and wrapped and davening. A friend of his, a colleague, they learned together when they were younger. They learned together Kabbalah, and they were students together. Had come to visit the Magid. After Shachris ended, so he was waiting to say hello to his youngest colleague from all the years past. But you see, the Rebbe Magid continues to daven. After a while, finally finishes davening, and the friend goes over and they start talking. The friend says to him, "We both learned together the same kavanas in Kabbalah about what davening is. And most of us finished davening a few hours ago, and I see the Magid continues to daven." So the Magid asked him, "What does he do for a living?" So he says he goes a few times a year, twice a year, to the Leipzig, was the famous market city, a city where there's a lot of trading going on. Spends a few weeks there, buys material and the merchandise, and then comes back, and his family throughout the year they resell it for a small profit. So the Magid says to him, "And how long does this journey take?" He says, "It takes, I have to prepare myself, I have to pack up, and then I have to go and find a place to stay, and that's it." So the Magid says, "I don't understand why you have to spend so much time. Why not just stay where you live, close your eyes, and contemplate how you go to Leipzig, and how you buy merchandise, and how you bring it back, and how you make a profit?" So the guy says to them, this colleague says to the Magid, you're a batlin. A batlin means like you're not in touch with reality. We need this. I need the scheda. I need the material. It's not going to help sitting in my house where I live and contemplate on it. I need the material to be able to bring it back. And that's why I have to travel. So the Maggid says to him the same thing. If you're davening, you need the scheda, the material. It's not just sitting and contemplating on a few kavanas. You have to travel there. And the journey takes time. He's explaining to him the difference between davening and davening. And I remember the Rebbe telling the story of Shabbos Bereishis, Tavshin Mem Aleph, was once when the Rebbe told it, and a few other times, very with details. And so when you need the scheda, when you need the scheda, then you have to then actually take a journey, and a journey doesn't take overnight. A journey takes hours and hours and hours. It doesn't take quickly, I should say. It takes hours and hours. When you learn a little about what Talis and Tefillin and Shema and all that is here, you start getting a sense a little of what this journey is like. Okay.
But what is the hug that the woman gets? I mean, what do we get? What do we use for a hug?
Why don't you tell me? Have you ever been hugged by God?
I don't know.
You think if you put on Talis, you'd suddenly feel God's
hug?
No,
I don't want to put on Talis. I'm saying, is there a correlate to a woman?
It means that when you do what you have to do in the morning, when you start, if you pray or you don't pray, when you say Moda'ani, God is hugging you without the Talis.
Okay.
As simple as that.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
I mean, you can elaborate. As I said, I would talk about it at the end of the class. I see you don't. That's not good enough for you, huh?
I'm sorry, Rabbi. Please continue. I will wait patiently. Sorry.
Maybe I can hold back. Maybe we could think about the war in Israel. We heard many women who say that during the war, how they survived, they all of a sudden felt like there's something surrounding them and protecting them. Maybe that's what it means. God is hugging that woman who survived.
True.
I know most men would not say this, but if you think about a woman who carries a child, and a child of God's in her womb for 9 months, so most people think how uncomfortable it is, the pain involved, the difficulties. But if you think of it from God's point of view, that He's giving life through you, so a man could say, hey, how do I experience that hug of God? By putting a life within me. No man ever carries a life within them. You know, as that little girl that said to her mother, a pregnant mother, Mommy, how do you have room inside yourself for another person? And I thought to myself, men don't even have room for people outside of themselves, let alone inside themselves. So everybody has their way of experiencing godliness.
Mm-hmm.
And when we say that a woman is absolved from mitzvahs that are time-bound, the reason is because she herself embodies time. So she is reflects time itself, the moons, the cycles of the moon, and so on. So everybody has that connection. It's just a question, a matter of how. Remember, women experience love like a noun, like a state of being. Men experience love like an action, like a verb. So a man needs more actions to keep his animal soul at bay, where a woman is more of a malchus, and therefore far more the divine Shekhinah itself manifests within her. Shabbos is called the queen. The weekdays are related to the male. On Shabbos, a man doesn't put on tefillin. Why not? If it's a day of connection, like we're learning here, why doesn't he put on tefillin? The same reason a woman doesn't put on tefillin all week long, because she's Shabbos all week long. She doesn't need to put on tefillin. She is tefillin. She has that. So when a woman fulfills her mission in life, whatever that mission may be, if it's in the childbearing years, if it's later being a mother or being a friend or being nurturing to others. This is about bringing the embrace of God to each one of us, and every one of us has it our own way. So it's about finding it through your mitzvahs, through the things that you're obligated and your mission in life. And if you embrace God in that way and God embraces you, that's the power that you get to achieve these levels.
And why do we say show us on the Isha then? It sounds so great. The other way.
This is exactly why I didn't want to talk about it here, because it's not a class about women.
Okay.
It's a class about davening and about how to connect to God.
It's
That's
all
why I
well
said
said.
I would talk about it at the end of the class. And I am very focused on what we're learning here. You know, everything has its time and place. I know we could have a whole class about women and men, and for that matter, Jews and non-Jews. I mean, the next question would be, how do non-Jews experience this level of Makif? They don't put on Talis and Tefillin. Okay. So continue where we're up to on the second line of page 395. There's nothing to be sorry about. I'm a teacher in a class trying to focus on what we're learning here. This also is a lesson of how you have to compartmentalize what you're learning. You can't bring everything into everything. It's not I'm not complaining. I understand it's a legitimate question. It's a fair question. It's a personal question as well, and it deserves an answer. I'm just trying to place things because you can't talk about everything all the time. Okay. So second line, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. He continues now, which comes after Shema. What do we say after Shema? So he just said that's ma'amis, the emes of Yichud Allah, or the Yichud Elyon. And by the way, since we're already on it, I should correct myself. On the top of page 393, I mistakenly interpreted an acronym as Sur Merah. So he says, Oid Mitam Shenoskos B'lev Daf Shzo B'chin Sur Merah the mitzvahs. And I even tried to explain why does he say Sur Merah, not Asay Tev. It's not Sur Merah, it's Seif Maisa. It's Seif Maisa. That mitzvahs is Seif Maisa b'machshava tchila, meaning, if you remember, the beginning is wedged in the end, so the highest levels of Kodesh Elyon come down to Seif Maisa in the end, in the actionable world of Elam Asiyah, Asiyah of Asiyah in this lowest of world. So I just wanted to correct that Samach Vav Mem there is Seif Maisa. Not talking about necessarily the negative mitzvahs or the positive, just in general, all the Maisa mitzvahs. Okay, correction. Fine. So now we continue here, top of 395. So after we finish Shema and V'hoyim Shemaya and V'yema, then we say, what do we say at the end? Shem Lekechem Emes, and we continue. Emes, V'yatziv, V'nochen, the 15 different expressions that confirms it's true, it stands, it's correct. So what is the point of that? Why do we say that? So he says, because the whole point of Shema is not just to experience and to contemplate on God's unity, but to make it a reality in your life. So the Emes V'yatziv V'nochen is like confirming this, what we just contemplated on, what we just said, is true. It's like like a rubber, I say rubber stamp. It's confirming
affirmation.
Yeah, I just said confirms. That's what Yatziv V'nochen. It confirms. It affirms in different ways. Lahavi l'kiyam ha'maisa, because you wanted to bring to actual performance and action. Shuzeu ha'ikar be'emes bereish teich seif, because that's the primary truth. It's not enough just to contemplate. So he was saying before, since we want the Achdus of Shema to become a reality, a true, tangible, concrete reality in our lives, so that's why we need the mitzvahs and the Kedama of Talis and Tefillin, because that helps when you have all those tools and you're wrapped with the Makif. It all is ma'amis and confirms that truth. So that lahova the kima ma'isa, like he said, to b'chol nafshecha, neitlas nafshecha, b'chol meidecha, shezawa ika be'emes b'reish teich seif. Reish teich seif means from the top, reish the head, teich seif, through the middle to the end. In other words, you bring in the highest truths of the divine reality that we talked about, the highest levels of Achdus, of Yichud, of Hashem Echad, of Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, I should say, into the lowest levels, that it should become a tangible and a palpable perception of the animal soul as well, which we'll get back to soon. So therefore, he's just driving. So that's the emes v'yatziv v'nochin. V'hainu, which means Mashe Yiskayim Ha'ava Eliki is the b'chol levavcha, that this love of God that comes b'chol levavcha, that is inspired and stimulated and aroused through Shema. So you come to b'chol levavcha hava, I loving haftas Hashem lekach b'chol levavcha, it should be sustained and should perpetuate kol hayom, all day long, b'kiyum nitzchi, in a kiyum nitzchi, in an eternal, perpetual kiyum, sustainable state. Sheyiyim is a sur merav asay tev. So it's not just to remain a philosophical, abstract, or theological concept, but it should permeate the person to the extent that even after davening, it should remain all day long. To sur merav asay tev, it should affect you. Because as we learned in Tanya and Perikut Beis, and he's going to say it here too, that if you know that it's very easy after davening, even if you daven properly, and then after you finish davening, you put away your Talis and Tefillin after Shema and everything, it's easy for it all to dissipate, the inspiration. And it should never pause or in any way be interrupted or end. So that's the emes v'yatzav v'nochin that confirms it all. All this ef shalias mitzad hasogel lekis v'ispalas ha'ava shenel demezeh b'krishma, to have such an ability, that it has such an effect on a person, and now he's adding a perpetual effect that should last and be sustained and not dissipate. It's not sufficient to have a divine comprehension. And even an excitement and a stimulated love, Shenel de Mezeh Krishma, that was given birth to the love during Shema. Because on its own, yes, it's very powerful for the moment, but then it will dissipate and mizbatel, and like a fire, it will go out. It will be extinguished immediately after davening. To the point there will be no residue, no effect left at all, no after effect at all, no impact at all afterwards. Reishim is also no trace of it at all. That's a good word. That means as if that never happened, no trace of it at all. So during davening, yes, it was real, but it didn't last. Ki yadua, as it's known, shaha'ava shabah mitzad ha'asogad nefesh halikis, the love that comes due to the comprehension of the divine soul, chelefes ve'everes. It changes and it passes. It's subject to change, and it's subject to dissipation and so on. The einza nikra emes, and you can't call it true emes, because emes, as he explains in Tanya as well, and he's going to bring here, emes is something that lasts. If something is true only during a certain period of time, even in science, if you have an experiment and it's only true under certain circumstances or only in a certain period of time, and then that truth does not continue, it's not been verified. It has to be verified as something that continues. Emes means through and through. Shari omar svas emes tichin la'ad va'ad argia loshen sheker. Sfas emes, something that is the true sfasir speech, a true word. Tichin la'ad is established forever. V'adargia loshen shakar, something that is expressed loshen, something a lie, is only regir, is only the rega, is temporary. Lies cannot last; they can't be sustained. That's why you see a lie will always need more lies to support it. A truth lasts because it's true. As soon as you say a lie, you're going to have to find all kinds of explanations to justify a false statement. So falsity is temporary, basically, and truth is forever. So what do you see from that? So Ava that's born in the divine soul, if it doesn't last, you can't call it emes. This doesn't mean it's not emes in that moment. It means true emes, you can't call it. So what then can guarantee that you should sustain and you should perpetuate this deep love that should affect the animal soul, that affect the person all day long, all the time? Achamakayim umaymid bikiyam nitzchila ava elikis. What preserves, what sustains, and maymid gives it. Maymid means like puts it on its feet, establishes it. What sustains and establishes in a kiyum nitzchi, in an eternal, perpetual sustainability to this love, this divine love, lamaisa, in action, bli nefila la'elam, that it should never weaken, or nefila means it shouldn't fall, it shouldn't retreat, or it should not weaken. Zeu shaba mekeach ha'er makif ha'elyon the Talis and Tefillin. This is what comes from the keach of the Makif, of the transcendent energy, the higher supernal transcendent energy of Talis and Tefillin. Shalovash kedem atfila, that he enclothed himself, that he put on, dressed himself before davening. Sheneisen keach ve'ez, that gives power and strength. Lamakiv de naran, to the makiv of nefesh, ruach, neshama, which is the conscious faculties, she'ekayim lasoge ba'ave shekish makiyum nitzchi, to sustain and establish, to sustain the contemplation of the love, the divine love of Krishma, kiyum nitzchi, in an eternal and perpetual continuation, ula'ames esa'ava, and to ratify and to confirm, to resonate the love, shaleitipa la'elam, that it should never fall, it should never weaken, should never dissipate. Vidal, the Maven, says the Mittler Rebbe. Meaning he said enough that he feels that with this we can work with. And Maven. It's enough for the discerning ones, for the understanding ones. It's a pretty heavy piece here. Okay. Now, all this is the Mittler Rebbe, pure Mittler Rebbe. When you look at the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, I don't recall that he brings this point about sustaining. He just says it gives the power to affect the animal soul. I just want to see if there's anywhere a hint to the nitzki of it. You could probably find it a little when he talks about the difference between Avshalakis and Avshabamis, maybe. But I don't see it really.
Was he talking about the kavana you should have when you say Shema? Is he saying this is the importance of saying v'yatziv v'nachon, or both?
And beyond both, another most important point, what you just said is correct, but much more than that. He's explaining what Talis and Tefillin does. On its own, the contemplation on its own,
I see,
is only going to be temporary, only during.
It reinforces it, makes it more permanent, more lasting.
Well, the Makif that you're drawing down gives it that sustainability.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. And any questions? Now, I've never learned this mimer before, just for the record. I mean, I glanced at it over the years, but I never really learned it like this. There's some really unbelievable stuff here. I have not seen another Maimonim quite spelled out. And now he adds a parenthesis. This is a parenthesis that has an end. It ends at the end of the paragraph. He says, V'zehu, the beautiful concept. Very, very well. Okay. Shekol HaKeda Krishma, this is what it says in Chazal, that someone who reads Krishma, without tefillin, ki'ilu made eid sheker ba'atzmei. It's as if he bore for himself false witness, false testimony. Why? Because ba'emrei v'kshartem. In Shema we say v'kshartem leis al yadecha. You should bind it as a sign on your arm. So he's saying, so if a person says Krishma without tefillin, he's bearing false witness because he said Vikshatim, he said, bind yourself on your arm. That's tefillin. How could you say that when you're not doing it? I understand you could ask the question, what about the Shema we say other times of the day that we don't put on tefillin? We're talking about, of course, Shachris now. The Shema during Shachris. And we shall talk again. At the end, I'll talk more about women as well about this as well. So Kshatim. So he's now explaining this Maimer Chazal. On a practical Baal Batisha level, the explanations, as I just said. If you're saying in Shema V'kshatim Le'esal Yadecha, and you don't have the Kshatim, actual Kshatim, it's like so you're bearing false witness. You're making a false statement. But the Mittler Rebbe is going to explain it deeper. Why is it called Sheker? Not just because you're technically not wearing tefillin, because what he's saying, because tefillin draws down the emes v'yatziv, that makes it something that lasts. And if you don't have it lasting, then it's not can be called emes, it's sheker. So he says like this: Shagam di'chudi lo de krishma, also bekavona v'rusa de liba. Though that yichudi lo of Shema itself, without talis and tefillin, without tefillin. So you're doing it with kavana, you're saying it with intention, but usa deliba and desire of the heart, like we said before, that's the concentration that's necessary when you say Shema and you internalize all that, the yichud, the unification, the unity with God. However, im eina mekayim kshartem be'esesha, if he does not perform kshartem, meaning that he bound himself, and that's the interesting word, bind yourself. It doesn't just say just put on tefillin. Is kshartem la'esal yadecha, to bind yourself with this sign. But Shah at that time, when he's doing the Shema, so then it's made ed sheker Shah benafshe. So then he's like bearing witness, false witness during that time in his nefesh. He's not being real. It's something. There's a dissonance going on. There's disconnect. She'ena nikra emes klal. It's not called emes klal, beloy Makif the tefillin, without the Makif of the tefillin. So it's not just the technically saying, hey, you're not putting on tefillin. How could you say v'kshatim when you don't have tefillin on? No, the emes comes through the Makif of tefillin. Shal gabe haresh. I know kshatim leisal yadecha, but there's also the tuf is beinei necha. V'kshatim leisal yadecha. The tefillin shal gabe haresh. It's referring to both. The tefillin that's on top of his head, the eina miskayim kol hayom kanal. And it won't be perpetuate. It won't sustain throughout the day. So in a sense, the Shema, therefore, is that's why it's such a strong statement. Say false witness. You could just say, if you don't put on tefillin, you're not fulfilling what you're saying. But he's saying a strong thing here because it's not. If it's not lasting, it's not real. It's not true emes. It's sheker to some extent. He's now adding. Because when do you really see, where's the litmus test? What's the real, when do you really see something is true? At the end of the process, not in the beginning. If someone's inspired at the beginning, okay, very nice. The question is, did it last? So it's emes you see b'sov dafka, shezeo b'seif ma'isa dafka. That's at the end of the action. That's when you see, did it last throughout? Shenichel b'mitzvahs tefillin. Seif Maisa, which is all encompassed in the mitzvah of tefillin, of the huksha kol ha'teira mitzvahs l'tefillin. So we say Seif Maisa, you could say 1 second, we're only doing about tefillin here. No, but tefillin, like you said before about tzitzis, shkuli connected kol ha'mitzvahs, by tefillin it says huksha kol ha'teira l'tefillin. The whole teira is compared to teira to tefillin. Here he says teira mitzvahs. I think Chazal says teira, but he says teira mitzvahs. The Rebbe explains it somewhere. I think they cite down below in Likutei Sichos. Sheba Parsha Shema b'klav kanal. Why? Because in tefillin you have Parsha Shema, and we know Shema. We learned that Shema encompasses all the mitzvahs. The yichud of Shema encompasses all the mitzvahs. So,
can you translate huksha? Does it mean connected to?
No, huksha means compared. Huksha when you make a comparison between things, huksha, compared to.
Okay.
Shebo Pasha Shema Beklaf canal. And it's not just Shema, it's also Beklaf on parchment. So it's also physical, permeated the physical. So that's where the parentheses. One second. That's where the parentheses adds. He's adding, driving the point home about how Tefillin, the Makif of Tefillin and Talis and Tefillin. It doesn't say Talis here because it says Dafke Tefillin, doesn't mention Talis, but the same idea is what is Ba'amis. It confirms and validates and ratifies the emes of the yichud of Shema. That's what he says here. Okay. So we'll stop here.
I was just going to say,
we finish the end of the paragraph. In the paragraph, I'll stop for questions.
I was just going to make a comment, just how beautiful this is, even philosophically, on the nature of truth. That it's only true if it doesn't change, if it lasts, and its meaning is the same at the end as it was at the beginning. And it's an interesting test for all of us. So, like, let's say you say, I'm going to do something, but it's not really true until you do it. It's not true until you fulfill what you say, you practice what you preach. And if you don't, then you're not I won't say you're not a truthful person, but you're not an earnest person. It's just a fascinating commentary on the nature of truth itself. And that as it applies to maintaining the truth of the higher yichud of Elokus needs to be carried throughout the day, and that we get that additional, pump or encouragement by putting on Talis and Tefillin, and that somehow without that it won't be as permanent. It won't have that same lasting effect. And so that you really want to sustain the truth of that yichud, then that's why you start davening in the morning with Talis and Tefillin. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. Agreed, yes.
It's very beautiful because truth is something lacking in our world, as you know. So Olam Sheker, and just truth is such a limited commodity in our lower.
A rare
culture.
Commodity, yeah.
Yeah, that's thank you. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. So we'll stop here at the end of this paragraph. Any other questions or comments?
Just that it's not a commodity.
Not a commodity at all, maybe, yeah.
Well, it should be everything.
What Madison Avenue cynics put it this way: it doesn't matter what happened; it matters what people think happened.
Well said.
Right. You tell a lie enough, people will finally believe it.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why the Jewish people sustained Am Yisrael Chai till today, because they were bearing witness to a truth that was greater than all of us and never stopped bearing testimony.
Beautiful.
And the world hates us for that.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Very beautiful.
Kill the witness.
Very beautiful.
Kill the witness.
The messenger.
We want to cover up the truth. We're having too much fun here, playing and doing meaningless things and thinking we're the gods we're in control of everything. Kill the people who say that's not exactly right.
Yeah, that's why Haman was incensed when Mordechai would not bow to him.
100%. Wow, that's a new touch on anti-Semitism that hasn't quite been said that way before. Maybe you have. I haven't heard that. That's beautiful.
Yep. But now we Jews have to make sure that we do live up to that and actually do tell the truth, because unfortunately some Jews also fall into the trap at times,
100%.
Okay. So are there any questions? If not, I'll say a few words about do an ode to the women of our generation.
You're very poetic today. I can't wait to hear.
Yeah. So I'm not going to elaborate. I've given quite a few classes on this, the role of men, the role of women, and obviously the big questions out there. I'm not saying anyone's asking that here, but there are many, many, many that have the common stereotype that women are second-class citizens and they can't be a rabbi and they don't get aliyahs don't put on tefillin, and we say Shaloi Asani Isha. I mean, I give you the whole list and litany that I've been at the brunt of and received quite a few times. So I don't want to go through all of it because it's really a class of its own, and I have done it quite a few times. If you look up online, I'm sure you'll find many things from me. But in context of what we're learning here, and maybe just the broad, keep in mind this. God created the world. He created the human race, gave us a mission to fulfill his mission, which is, I say his, I don't even want to use the word his on God because he's not a he, not a she, and he's not a he. He's beyond both. Just a term we use. So it's also part of the lexicon, which truth is we shouldn't use male, female on God as well. But he did create male and female. God created them. And two forms of divine entities, two all in one, and then separated them into two, as the Torah tells us in Genesis and Bereishis. And said, La'avda l'shama, your mission is to serve and protect and turn this world into a dira b'tachtenim, a home for God. Now, God could not give us a mission that he didn't give us the resources and the tools and the faculties to achieve. Not for men, not for women. If we don't have the tools to achieve it, what's the whole point of it all? So, in truth, men and women are meant to be two partners as one. That's what the Torah says, true soulmates. They're created as one, they're separated, and then they're meant to come together again and one divine union. That's the way it was meant to be. That's why love and marriage, a sacred marriage, are all part of the plan. It's part of creating unity in a fragmented world. Unfortunately, we live in a secular society where it's not necessarily a priority. But talk about emes, I have to state the emes. The Torah says it's not that marriage is more important than anything else. It means marriage is the fulfillment of the purpose. Part of it is bringing together the male and female aspect of existence. You want to put it in more cosmic terms, Kudsha Brichu and Shchinte, the yichud of the masculine divine energy and the feminine divine energy. And that's where you have one full picture. And together they complement each other. And that's exactly as God intended it to be. Their biological differences and physiological differences are just an extension and a reflection of their spiritual differences. Now, the truth is they both originate in Atzmus, some place that's beyond male and female. But as we've been learning, God wanted two tracks. My chapter in Torah Meaning for Life on women and men talks about this more in detail if you want to read it. The two spiritual tracks, this masculine spirituality, feminine spirituality. One is more a verb, one is more a noun. One is more a warrior aggressor, gets something. Like the Talmud says, that the man goes out and works, toils in the field, brings back the wheat, and the woman turns it into a challah. He brings back flax or wool or whatever it may be, and she turns it into a garment. So it's a full partnership without one being greater or better than the other. Each has their qualities, each has their strengths, like any good partnership, just like two musicians in a symphony and orchestra, they're both equally necessary and they're both equally indispensable and equally need each other and so on. So when you have a good picture like that, you have a proper union, all the issues of what the man does, what the woman is just a matter of role, division of labor. That's all it is. You know, not everybody can do everything. Not everybody's meant to do everything. So a woman lights the candles in most cases before Shabbos starts. The man usually makes kiddush. Doesn't mean a woman can't make kiddush and a man can't light candles. But each one is fitting to their personality. Generally speaking, you'll find that the woman's mitzvahs are connected much more to nurturing and to eternal energy, more intimate energy, like light. And a man's mitzvahs are more connected to actions and like refining the untamed world. Kiddush on wine. Wine is a symbol of aggression. You mekadesh the wine, you sanctify the wine. Lighting a candle is bringing light into the world. Instead of weapons, light dispels darkness. And I can go on and on and on. So now when you bring it back to the mitzvahs, we don't begin with the mitzvahs. We begin with God's plan. God said, here's my plan, and here's what each of you will do to complement each other in fulfilling my plan. Each has your role. So when you look at it that way, when a man puts on Talis and Tefillin in a way, you can say he's complementing what the woman is now doing. And when a woman does what she's supposed to be doing, she's complimenting what the man is not doing. So that's a critical point in the whole context of it. So it's the same thing with mitzvahs. We have mitzvahs that are only given to Kohanim and not Yisraelim. Only priests do certain mitzvahs. Eating truma, meiser, working in the temple. None of us. An Israelite, the Rebbe himself, is not allowed to go into the holy temple. It's only for Kohanim. So you'll say he's deprived? No. The Kohen is doing it for us. It's like a shliach tzibur. He's representing us in that work. And others do the other parts of the work. So it's not a question of one having something, the other not having. If you see yourself as one, I remember a beautiful thought that the Rebbe once said at a Farbrengen. It just comes to mind. You know, Yaakov, when he went to sleep on the Temple Mount, so he surrounded himself with stones, to protect himself from animals or whatever it may be. So we're told that the stones quarreled with each other because every stone wanted to be under the head wanted to be the pillow of the tzaddik, So the Torah tells us that the Torah uses the word not avonim but even, one stone, but he put many stones. So it says that God made a miracle and made all the stones become one. So it was like one ring of stones. So the question is asked, same problem. How did that solve the problem? Every section of the stone should want to be the one under his head. How does it help that you made all the stones into one? And the answer is that they're all one, they don't feel deprived because they're all connected. It doesn't matter. His head happens to be at this part, but all the stones are one entity. When there's true unity, you don't compete because you benefit from the others. It's like a human healthy body. If one organ is healthy, the rest of the organs will be healthier. You don't say, I want the health for myself. It's not the exact opposite. Every part, every detail down to a toenail needs to be healthy for the whole body to be healthy. So basically the concept of true feeling that type of bittul and unity. Now, when you get into the actual details, so Talis and Tefillin is what he's talking about here, the Makifim. But frankly, Malchus, which is a woman, is Makif. Where is Malchus rooted? Eishes Chayla Teres Baala. Malchus is rooted in Keser. She's Makif. She embodies Makif. A man is Zah. Zah is Pnimi. Zah is the midas of Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Chayd, Yisayid, and does not have Makif in it, at least not in a revealed way. So therefore, he needs to draw from Keser, which is the Makif alien, all the way from the highest level of Makifim. A woman embodies Makif. That's why it's the woman that carries life. Chava was called the mother of life. What is Adam called? From the earth, from the dust of the earth. If you talk about being derogatory, which sounds nicer, mother of life or dust of the earth? Because each has their particular role. The point being is that so for women, even the question of davening itself, so there's always a mitzvah of davening when you're in need for everybody. But since davening is a mitzvah shazman grama, dependent on time, so some say that a woman doesn't have a mitzvah to daven. She could daven. Doesn't mean she's not allowed to, but she could. So in general, so the question is, so how does she draw down all the blessings and all the powers that Philip draws down, including what we're talking about? The answer is in the things she's doing. If it's a mother that is nurturing her child, I'm talking about a mother with children, her taking care of a child from God's point of view is the hamshacha of atzmus itself. That's what Talis and Tefillin is good as a means to an end. But there's nothing greater than bringing up a child. That's the neshama itself. There's nothing greater than that. If it's a woman that's beyond childbearing age, the other things that she does, her nurturing qualities, her ability to be gentler, to bring godliness to people, whatever she's doing, she is being able to be mamshir everything that we're being mamshir. And this is a very common concept. I mentioned before Tefillin. The Rebbe would say this about Tachnun, that when you're not saying something or you're not performing a mitzvah because we're told now is not to do the mitzvah, it means that all the hamshachas of the mitzvah are coming other ways. A day when we don't say Tachnun, we're getting all the hamshachas of Tachnun through the day itself. On Shabbos, we don't put on Tefillin because Shabbos itself is like Tefillin. Shabbos. A woman doesn't put on Tefillin all week because all week she's like Shabbos. Just a little more letters and words, words and ideas around this topic. As I said, I can elaborate a lot more. I hope this suffices. Vidal, I'll use the Mittler Rebbe's Vidal Lemavin. Hopefully this is enough for the discerning one to discern even further.
Very good. Thank you, Rabbi. Also, I just want to point out that in Chayenu, they're doing a mimer of the Rebbe Rashab also talking about that an extra measure of understanding was bestowed upon a woman, and then elaborating on all of that. So obviously it's metaphorical in many ways too, but we need some concrete things too. I think I just needed a hug, that's all.
Okay, by all means. Well, we have to remember again, we have to look at how we complement each other. That's one point I made. And two, that each of us has in different ways. We experience similar ideas and so on.
Very beautiful exposition. Thank you, Rabbi.
Very good. Regarding B'chol Meidecha, I didn't give you the pages, but probably with a little search, you could find it all. It's all earlier 9 bays. I can tell you if you want, Dafka, which pages to look at. Yeah, look at page 1247. Speaks, that's where I think, actually earlier. No, sorry. More earlier.
So citations for what specifically?
The B'chol Meidecha that you asked me about.
Thank you for remembering.
Yeah, B'chol Meidecha. Primarily, I would say, for 1243 it begins, but it goes on for many pages. Keeps going back to it many times.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Good. We shall stop here. End of the paragraph, page 395. Very, very solid stuff.